Good to be with you again today on this wonderful Monday. And last week, Pastor Robin and I were talking to you about boundaries, and it got so interesting as we were talking about it that we decided we couldn't cover all that in 30 or 40 minutes. So we decided that we would continue today with the subject of marital boundaries. And last week we talked about how sometimes when a person gets married, especially young men, they don't cut the umbilical cord, not even always young men. But when you get married, Jesus said, therefore shall a woman leave her home, or a man leave his mother and father, a woman leave her home. And so Jesus taught that when you're married, you become one flesh, and there have to be boundaries that are established. You have to cut the ties with family. And I can't tell you how many times over the years as a pastor, I have counseled people that either the wife or the husband, they won't quit talking to the mother about all of the problems that are going on in their marriage. Every time they have an argument, they're right on the phone with mama, calling mama. And these things eventually can cause a separation and a divorce. And so there have to be boundaries that are established. We dealt with this last week. We talked about how parents can interfere in a marriage, and a lot of times parents use money to interfere in a marriage. If a couple is struggling, I've seen it a couple of dozen times in my ministry. The mother will say, "Listen, just dump him. I'll underwrite you. I'll carry you financially until you find a good man, and somebody that's good enough for you." And so parents often use money to destroy a marriage. And so you can't allow parents to interfere. When a man marries, he is to leave his father and mother and to be united unto his wife, Jesus taught us in Matthew 19:5. And then we talked about how friends can interfere in a marriage. And the Bible says a companion of fools shall suffer harm. And so a lot of times when a woman or a man, they have an argument, they'll run to their best friend and they'll tell their best friend about the argument, and the friend will begin to advise the person, say, we'll just go out, let's go out and hang out, and the next thing you know, you've got adultery in a marriage. And so a companion of fools shall suffer harm, the Bible teaches in Proverbs 13:20. And then we talked about job associates last Friday, and how you can go to work after being upset with your spouse, and there's always somebody there, as Pastor Robin said. I talked about men being dogs, but Robin said men or women can be dogs. They'll tell you how much better they would treat you if you were with them than your spouse is treating you. And so these are things that you have to establish boundaries. But there are other things that, and then we talked about sibling interference last Friday, and how brothers and sisters, if you've grown up with a sibling, how they'll advise you negatively concerning your marriage. So these are all people you can't allow to cross over boundaries in your marriage. But there are other things we're going to talk about today. And Robin, I know you've got some thoughts concerning boundaries that are probably important for people if they're married or if they're planning on getting married, either way.
Right, correct. Boundaries are a healthy part of a relationship. Sometimes when we think of a boundary, we think of like a wall that's put up. We imagine a wall that's put up between you and somebody else. And sometimes we think, oh, that's a bad thing, but not actually. That's not a bad thing, because it actually is a healthy thing, because it sets what's called limitations between how far somebody can go in a relationship, whether it be, your husband or wife, or if you're dating or at work, or you name it. So, so it is a very healthy thing. And some people don't like boundaries. Some people don't. I said this last week, the hardest word in the English language for people to understand is the word no. People do not like the word no. And so in order to establish great relationships, we have to have boundaries, because what happens if we don't have boundaries, we become overwhelmed, we become aggravated, we feel like, especially if I talked about this last week, especially if we are a people pleaser. People pleasers are the worst. They have a hard time saying no, and then before they know it, they have all this stuff, because they can't say no, on their shoulders, and they feel overwhelmed and overworked.
And a lot of times they develop a root of bitterness because they feel like the person's
Correct.
constantly bearing down on them.
Because they know that person's not going to say no, and they take advantage of that.
Right, and the person who can't say no,
Right.
they begin to be bitter toward the other person because the person doesn't recognize that they can't carry everything they're dumping on them, so
Right.
they keep dumping more on them. And when you're married, that's not healthy. Now, I have a question for you, Robin, and just your opinion on this. I've noticed a lot of people who are married, they have passcodes on their phone, and if a person, if the spouse asks them, well, what's your passcode? They'll say, well, that's none of your business. That's my private space. And so we're talking about boundaries, but is that in other words, saying, well, I deserve my privacy, so I don't want you looking in my phone? Is that a healthy thing?
Well, this is the way I look at it. If you have nothing to hide, you should be willing to open your phone or hand your phone to your spouse at any given moment. If you can't do that, if your spouse says, hey, can I see your phone, and you're very secretive and you're hiding your phone and you're turning your phone away, you're placing your phone upside down, so
on
if you
the face of the phone.
On the face of the phone.
Yeah.
And if you're married, you have to be willing to show your phone. There should be
transparency.
Right. There should be no second thoughts about it. It's like if everybody says, oh, they're invading my privacy. Well, I don't believe your phone is something you're invading your privacy. If there's something on your phone that you don't want your spouse to see, then you're already in trouble. Your relationship's already in trouble, because then you are doing things in secret. You're doing things that, if it can't be done in front of your spouse, you don't do it.
I bet you what was just brought up there, people watching this today, if you took 40 or 50% of people who are married, they don't let their spouse look in their phone.
Nope.
And that's wrong.
Right.
Because we talked last week about how people can be involved in an affair, and it's not a physical affair yet, but it's an emotional affair where they're confiding in somebody. Maybe you got a young man married, he's confiding in a lady that at work that he's friends with, or I've seen young couples get married, and then one of them will continue to have a too close a friendship with someone of the opposite sex that they grew up with or went to church with or whatever. And all of those things can lead to not just an emotional affair, but eventually a physical affair, because at some point, we talked about this last week, at some point you're going to hit a rough spot in your marriage where maybe you're arguing, could be over any number of things.
Right.
And then these things begin to come up. Now, I had a few thoughts concerning things I want to talk about that can also create division in a marriage. And this is going to sound a little offbeat, the things I want to talk about today. But I've seen divorces that are caused by a person being fixated with their job. And you can just, In other words, it's very easy to get on a high horse. You know, if you're working job and maybe you're a hard worker or you have your own business, and your wife or your husband, whichever the case may be, says, I don't ever see you anymore. All you do is work. And then the person flies off the handle. Look, I've got a family to support, and blah 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 blah. And they go off on a binger about that. And so, even a good thing can become a bad thing if you don't have a boundary with in your work, with how hard you work,
and those are what I call time boundaries.
the time boundary. That's true. And so, doesn't matter even if you're financially strapped. And I understand some people are working 2 jobs these days. I've even heard of people working 3 jobs just to get by these days. And but you have to set some kind of a boundary on your job to where you're not just fixated with your work. And I've seen marriages fall apart over a job, and a job's a good thing, you know. But a job isn't everything, and so you have to have enough. And here's what the thought I would have about that. Okay, you had that job before you married that person. How was it you found all that time to date them before you got married?
Right.
In other words, the underlying thought behind that is, well, I'm married now, and we're in this. I've got him, so I'm going to work. And,
Right.
well, I don't ever see you. Just shut your mouth. I'm working to support you. That's a bad attitude to have.
Yeah. There has to be what is priority. Yes, I understand that priority is. Yeah, I have a mortgage, I have a car payment to pay, I have bills, you know, I have food I have to put on the table. But there has to be a healthy boundary between your family and between your job. If you're spending all your time at the workplace, you're neglecting your family.
They had that job
that takes place.
And they had that job before they got married. Where did they find all that time to date? You know?
Right, exactly. So
where did all that time come from?
There has to be priorities that are set. You have to and this is one thing that I know many of you will agree with. People, when they get married, they stop dating their spouse. And that's a whole nother subject we can get into. So, when you start neglecting something, you're paying more attention to your job than you are your home. You know, you're not taking your spouse out on dates. You're not nurturing the relationship. You're not involved in some type of intimacy of some kind, you know, sitting down, talking, you know, communicating, you know, sharing your thoughts and things of life. Those are boundaries we really need to, in our relationship, we really need to be thinking about a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. They need to be established.
Right.
Now, this is another one, and I think it's particularly important for young men and young women. I've noticed, and I've talked to any number of people that are married that have a problem with this. You get a young man that's married, and he goes to the gym every day. He wants to work out. In other words, he doesn't have an hour for his wife, but he's got 3 hours to go to the gym.
Right.
And I think other than marrying the fitness instructor from 24-Hour Fitness,
Right.
there has to be some kind of boundary set there, because I've noticed, and I've actually talked to people that say, hey, if she doesn't like that, that's too bad. I had more than one young man has told me, she doesn't like that, that's too bad. I'm going to work out.
She can come and work out with me. Well, sometimes it doesn't. It's not that easy, especially if you have children and you have no means of someone to care for those kids while you're. And a lot of the gyms today, they have daycares or things like that.
Yeah.
But sometimes, you know, it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. But some people become overly.
Well, they fixate,
right.
And why is
Which
it?
Isn't healthy.
Why is it? Is it more healthy to be healthy than to have your marriage be healthy? In other words, a person said, "Hey, she's not going to." I've had more than one young man tell me, "She's not going to stop me from going to the gym. I'm going to the gym," and they'll stay 3 hours at the gym.
Once again, this is where time boundaries come into place.
There you go.
Right.
There you go. And so there's a lot of people that want a healthy body, but they don't want a healthy marriage.
Right.
And so that is definitely one of them that I've dealt with and have read about here at the ministry center. And here's a really big one right here. There's a really big one right here. Okay, so you've got a spouse, and they're sitting at home all alone while you're out hanging out with your friends. and then you don't understand why your marriage is falling apart. You've got no time for your spouse, but you've got hours to go out and hang out with your friends, to watch a football game or to go here or to go there. You've got hours every day to hang out with friends, but you have no time for your spouse. And then you're wondering why your marriage is falling apart. That's abject stupidity, I think, that people, they place a priority on their friends over their spouse, who they're supposed to be one flesh with. And I really think there's a danger in leaving your spouse sitting while you're out doing something because you just like doing it.
Right, exactly. Well, there's a line that comes up where, you know, God should always be first and foremost in your life, above anything, above your spouse, above your children. Then comes your spouse, and people go, no, wait a minute. No, that's my kids. That's not true. You have to have your spouse come after God, and then your children, because you can't put your children above your spouse, because you have to make sure you have a good relationship with your spouse, so that just dominoes effects down to your children, and then come your friends, and then come your other relationships, the church, all those things. So
and your kids are going to grow up.
A healthy balance.
Your kids are going to grow up. They're going to find somebody, and they're not going to care what you're doing.
Right. Yep.
Yeah,
because they watch and they learn. They learn from your relationship. They know.
Yeah.
They watch they watch.
Well, that's not my thought there.
Right.
My thought is they go off to live their own lives. So if you live your life for your children, you're going to turn around one day and you've ignored your spouse. Right. You're going to be.
Then you begin to grow apart because
right. You're going to be living with a stranger, and your kids aren't going to care what you're doing.
And you become roommates.
Yeah, and your kids aren't going to care what you're doing because they're going to have their own families. They're going to be off living their own lives, and so you think you invest everything in those kids over those 18 years or whatever the case may be, and that's your whole life. But your kids grow up. You're not going to be their whole life, so you better be developing a relationship with your spouse. Like I said, there better be a chain of order there where you've prioritized your spouse, because your spouse is either going to be there or not be there after those kids are gone. And so a lot of people, they don't think about that. But I was thinking about your little niece, Carissa. She's not your little niece anymore. She's married and probably soon to have her own family. But it seems like just yesterday she was in a little crib, you know, and just a baby. But here we are. It seems like a couple years ago, she's all grown up. And so I'm sure your brother Chris and his wife Frankie, their life has totally changed now because you know, Chris is gone, and it's just back to them again. And so you can't live just for your children, but a lot of people do, and they don't have boundaries there where they, and that's why a lot of women will badmouth the father to the children, and a lot of men will badmouth the mother to the children. There have to be boundaries there where you keep your mouth shut about your spouse. Because even though that's their mother or their father, you're planting a seed that's going to germinate and grow when you do that. And there have to be boundaries there. And so there's so many areas of our life we have to have boundaries in, and especially in marriage. Now, there's a lot of people, and oh, by the way, Robin, I forgot to mention, you know, last Friday, people were on with us, and we really weren't looking at the iPad. We're kind of new to social media, but there were a couple of people making comments, and if they're back with us again today, I do apologize to you. We didn't even, we got to talking away here and didn't recognize that you were interacting with us on whatever platform you were watching us on, asking questions or making comments, and we will try and really pay attention to that because we want you to talk to us. If you have questions, we want you to ask questions, and we want you to interact with us. This is for you. When we come on social media teaching or talking about different topics from a biblical perspective, we certainly want to hear what you have to say about it. So we do ask you to forgive us if you were on with us last week and we weren't catching the fact you were making comments or asking questions. We just got to talking away and we weren't even looking down at the iPad. But we do want to make this the type of podcast where we're interacting with you. So we'll work harder at that and talk back to you when you talk to us. And you know, Robin, I'm thinking in terms of my own family growing up. There were 5 of us children, and my mother and father, of course, my parents wound up in a divorce, but I think a lot of what I observed growing up was a good example for why boundaries have to be set.
Right.
And you have to, in other words, what can happen, and I've noticed not just with my mother and father, but with so many other people I've observed their marriages. If you don't have healthy boundaries, and eventually what you're doing, you're chipping away at a relationship. It's like taking a hammer and chipping away at a rock. Eventually, the rock's going to crack,
Right.
and it may take years. Even if you take a small hammer and keep hitting on a rock with a metal hammer, it may not happen right away, but eventually the rock's going to crack and divide. And so it is with marriage. If you don't think about your relationship, because Jesus said you become one flesh, and other than a few very limited number of things, God doesn't give you the option of leaving a person once you marry them. Now, in adultery, the Bible gives you that option. I believe in a situation where a person is addicted and they're abusing you because of their addiction.
Right.
There again, I believe a person can divorce and remarry, but you can't just divorce a person and remarry somebody else because you get out of bed one morning and decide you don't like them. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
Jesus said you're one flesh with that person, and so boundaries are important. And without them, I don't think marriages.
Right.
If they do last, they're not normal marriages. They're abnormal marriages.
Well, it all starts out with the right foundation. So when you're dating or you become engaged, I think it is very important. My niece did this at the university, that her and her now husband, fiance at the time, were going to a marriage counselor at the university they're going to in Arizona. And they talked about all these things. They talked about, physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, emotional boundaries, material boundaries, talked about, money, and I mean, you name it. So they had an understanding when they were going into the relationship of the things that they liked, things they didn't like, and they set those boundaries and understood, well, this is what we can't do financially. They have a budget. They have all this stuff. And this causes everything, I noticed with my niece, everything runs smooth. As a matter of fact, one time when I was talking to her on the phone, she said, Auntie, I'll have to let you go. Alex is calling because we need to talk about our finances, And so, it's best to start off the foundation. Build a strong foundation in your relationship. Set those boundaries up. Have an understanding. And as time goes on, you might have to adjust those boundaries because situations change, circumstances change, and sometimes those boundaries have to be readjusted. And so, but it's very important that the foundation that's set when you before you get married is very, very important.
So here's a question, Robin. So, okay, you have a couple that get married, and one is a saver, and one is a big spender. What's the situation there concerning boundaries? One's a saver, one's a spender. One likes to take his paycheck or her paycheck, go out and blow that paycheck. The other's a saver. So what happens when you put a couple like that together?
They have to set up major boundaries as far as finances go to. Have to come to agreements, and if it has to be, well, you are set up to have this much each week for an allowance to do what you want to do, and this is what I have each week to be able to do what I want to do. But you have to set up some type of financial agreement. Or whatever you want to call it, contract or whatever.
Well, it's got to be a boundary. Actually, it is a boundary.
In your marriage, and a boundary financially, so that when something arises, hey, I can't do that. I better go talk to my spouse about that. I better make sure that they're in agreement with this, because this just isn't my money; it's our money. We're a team. We're married now.
And where I really think it becomes a problem if two people get married, one's a spender, one's a saver.
Right.
Is when you throw credit cards into the mix, and so you've got a married couple. They've got a pocket full of credit cards. One's a spender, one's a saver. And now you got a problem, because that person's not only spending money that they earned, but they're spending money they don't even have.
And we've seen this a lot. We've had people.
We've seen it in family.
Have talked in family. People that have actually talked to us that we've pastored. both spouses are on a completely different spectrum and as far as how they believe money should be spent. But you have to, regardless, you have to come and you have to set up boundaries as far as your money is concerned. You just have to. Some way, somehow, there has to be some type of boundary set so that you don't get in there, because then, of course, we all know what happens after, if you don't follow those boundaries, that one spouse begins to spend money you don't have.
Well, number
you
one-
run up short.
Number one cause of divorce is lack of money.
Exactly. Lack of money, lack of finances.
Yeah, and then now you're arguing.
Right, now you're arguing.
'Cause you can't
now
pay
you're
your
at each
bills.
other's throats because so that's why it is so important before you get married to somebody that you set a foundation. And I say if you can't come into agreement with something,
Don't marry a
maybe you
person.
should marry that person.
No, and I did a 60-second short a while back, and someone commented that they really took a pop shot at me, but I talked about one of the richest men in the world, Warren Buffett, and so they came to Warren Buffett and they said, Mr. Buffett, you're wealthy beyond imagination. What is the number one key to attaining wealth? And he thought for a moment, and he said, who you marry. Who you marry is your number one key to attaining wealth. And what he was saying, Jesus taught that when we marry somebody, we become one flesh with that person. But what Warren Buffett, I think he was kind of tying into that, because he was saying your spouse is the person who you're working your life with, and you have to be on the same page with that person.
You got to be on the same wavelength.
Same wavelength. Right? And I said that in a short, and somebody got mad at me and took a pop shot, and they said, hey, just because you're married, your life's your life, their life's their life. No, sorry, but Jesus said one can chase 1,000 devils, but two can set 10,000 devils to flight. To succeed in life, there's great power in agreement. And if you are married to somebody, but you don't have healthy boundaries set, and you haven't come into agreement as to how you're spending your money, well, you're either headed for a divorce or a miserable marriage, one of the two.
And when people speak like that, that is a desire for control.
Yeah.
That's what it is, and that is an unhealthy boundary. Those are people that try to manipulate others. They want to, it's just not a healthy it's an unhealthy boundary to be in, because you want to control the situation. You think, you're the one in charge, and that's another bad foundation to build on.
When you're not accountable one to another, there is a sense of being out. You're out of control. In other words, a person who, why does a person even want to bother to get married if they're not trying to work with that person toward a better future? I don't get that. I don't understand what a person's thinking would be for even bothering to get married if they're not working toward a more successful future. And a lot of people aren't. They're just floating along.
Right.
They get married for whatever reason. I don't know. They're horny or something. I guess I don't know why they're getting married, but they're.
Come on now.
They're just it doesn't make sense to me. I see people getting married. I'm scratching my head. Why are they getting married? Because they're not heading anywhere. They're not going anywhere.
And I would like to know what the statistics are. I know there's the statistics on marriage and divorce, but I would like to see the statistics on what amount of people go and have a marriage counseling or go to somewhere and set up a healthy foundation and set up boundaries and talk about all of these things before you get married. Talk about your finances, talk about physical, talk about emotional, talk about time boundaries, talk about all those things. That'd be interesting to see who actually does that. Who sets up, or do most people just, well, we talked about those things, but we kind of just lightly, just breezed on by those things about finances. We didn't talk about, if we wanted to have kids. And then they just jump into the marriage, and then they get into the marriage, and there's no order. It's complete chaos.
There's no agreement.
There's no agreement.
Yeah.
And then, you come up against a financial problem, and then all of a sudden, this is the main reason why people get divorced today is because of lack of finances.
Well, here's a good thought too, and I'm going to pop this thing over in another little zone for a moment. Okay, Samson was anointed from birth. And he had, from birth, Samson had a Nazirite vow. He was one of the judges of Israel. And actually, the Bible calls him one of the judges, which is, a very lofty position spiritually to have been in. But Samson, he was never to have his hair cut. All of his lifetime. Samson, his power symbolically was in his hair. And so it was never, as a Nazirite, he was never to have his hair cut. Number two, he's never to touch any unclean thing. Okay, so one of the things God had commanded Samson to do is he was not to marry outside of his own tribe.
Right.
And I'm going to pull that over into today in just a moment. Samson was to marry among his own people. That was it, when he was to find a wife. God had told him, "You're a judge over Israel. It was biblically required, spiritually required, that he marry a woman of his own tribe, someone who believed like he believed." But Samson didn't want to do that. He wanted to go out and find a Philistine woman who were Israel's enemies and wanted to wipe them off the face of the map. And if you get over into Gaza Strip today, it's still the same tribe that's trying to kill Israel today.
Right.
Okay, so what Samson do? He goes out, he finds Delilah, and he begins to run around with Delilah. She's exciting to him. And before very long, Samson's had a haircut, and it's time to die. He's strapped between two pillars. The Philistines have made a mockery of his position in God. Now, why is it that people that are born again Christians, they've been raised in the gospel, we've been raised to understand the presence and the power of God, why is it that people go out and they date someone that isn't? If you're spirit-filled, why are you dating somebody that's not spirit-filled?
Right.
If you're a Christian, why are you dating a non-Christian? Why isn't there a boundary in your life there? And I'm talking to somebody out there today. Yeah. You've got Christ in your heart, but you're out looking around in the slop buckets, the pig's pen, for somebody to spend your life with. What's wrong with you? I mean, why are there no boundaries in your life? Why aren't you why are you going to the pig pen to find somebody to spend your life with? And there have to be boundaries even before you get married. You've got to recognize that this person not only is on the same page with you as far as the way you build your life, business life, build your financial life, but most importantly, I think in a person, you have to have a boundary in your life where you make sure you don't end up with somebody that is not on the same page with you spiritually.
Correct.
There has to be you have to have a boundary there where you're not going to go out and seek out a lifetime partner. It's like even I see people getting married. You hear people getting married and they're from different religions, and I don't understand that. Why? Yeah. How can you if you really love God, the Jesus taught biblically, it's so many words, I'm paraphrasing here, he either wants first place or no place in your life. Right. Yeah. So why would you make a lifetime partner out of somebody that isn't even interested in Jesus Christ? Right. But people do.
They do it all the time.
They do it all the time, and they profess to be born again. Right. Well, Jesus said, "If you love me, you'll keep my commandments." And so, how are you going to keep His commandments if you're butting heads with somebody the whole rest of your life that isn't interested in His commandments? Yep. So that'd be boundaries even before you get married. You have to really be thinking about who you marry. And
you need to date someone who makes God is first and foremost in their life above anything else.
Absolutely.
Above their job, above their family, above that is the one person in their life that comes first and foremost.
So I have a question. What is a Christian doing out in a nightclub on Friday night thinking they're going to find their one and only in a bar? But that's the world we live in today. Right. You've got people there out slip sliding around, and they think they're going to find they're going to find their one and only for life out in a nightclub or a bar.
Yeah. So then we could get into a whole other subject. So then you want to deal with someone that potentially has a substance abuse problem.
Yeah, or a demon.
Yeah.
If you bring somebody out of a nightclub or a bar that's been hanging out in those places, being a whoremonger, you're probably going to, if you do marry that person, you're going to be bringing a demon into your bed. So I'm going to leave that alone.
Light and
'cause
dark, they cannot have fellowship with
that's
one
right.
another.
Jesus said light and
Yeah.
darkness can't have fellowship one with another. So
Yeah.
what's going on in your head if you're thinking like that? There's somebody, and there is somebody that's going to watch this. That is how they think. They think they can go out and fall in love with somebody in the world, and then miraculously the Lord will work it all out. And the Lord won't work it all out because you've disobeyed the
Someone who's a contractor doesn't go in and they don't build the top part of the house before they put the foundation down.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen. You don't go in, you don't put the roof on before you have a foundation to put on it. So set the foundation, set the healthy boundaries, the limitations. Make sure God is the solid foundation of your relationship. And then what you do is you begin to do all of the other stuff that's involved in building that house and making that house as strong as it possibly can be.
Well, Samson, the story, going back to Samson, he had thousands of women of his own tribe to choose from, but he goes out and finds the temptress, Delilah. And of course, he's probably thinking, well, she's so much more exciting than that church girl down where I live. But
For a season.
yeah, and for a season, but in the end, Samson's
It's hell.
tied between two pillars.
Yep.
Now he doesn't lose his salvation over it. He brings judgment upon the Philistines. It takes more Philistines out in his death than he did during his lifetime. So he fulfills his commission as a judge over Israel, but it cost him his life.
Yep.
And you need to think about this, folks. You're especially if you're playing with the world right now, and you're a Christian, and you're seeing somebody that's not a Christian, is not interested in what you're interested in. You may as well get the hogwash out of your head that they're going to see the light because of you, and one day come to Christ, because your odds might be 2% out of 100. And so all you're going to do is you're going to ruin your life.
Yep.
And you may make it to heaven like Samson did, fulfill your destiny, but you got a whole lot of misery between here and
Yep.
there because
Right.
you don't have enough sense to choose your lifetime partner in the right place. So I think we ought to wrap it up with that, Rob. We've done way more than 30 minutes, but we do want this to become something people talk to us while we're doing it. I think once word gets out, they will.
Right.
I don't know if we had anyone, probably
No.
not, because we actually started just a little bit late anyway today. But I want you to tell folks how they can help us to spread this podcast out to others and help us to get the gospel out to more people.
Right. Like, share, and subscribe. Whatever social media platform you may be watching this on, like it, share it, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, you can also share it on YouTube and in a text or an email. Also, we are on every single day, Monday through Friday. That's 11:15 Central Time. If you're in Texas, that's 11:15. The East Coast, if you're in New York City, at lunchtime at 12:15. And if you are in California, that would be 9:15.
All right. Well, folks, we do appreciate you joining us, whether you're watching us right now or you will be watching it as it is placed on the different social media sites live today. But you may be catching it even beyond our being live today. And I've noticed that sometimes we have more than 100 people on Facebook alone that watches us. And so we hope we've been a blessing to you today. And until we're with you again tomorrow, as we always say to everybody out there, whether on radio or television or social media, go with God.
And God will go with you, my friend.